Hey there, and welcome back to ClearPath Conversations. I'm Mark Bernardin. In the last episode, we talked about the transition from individual contributor CSM to team lead. We covered what actually changes when you step into that role, how to avoid common leadership traps, and why managing a team requires a completely different skill set than managing accounts. Today, we're shifting gears to talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention in customer success: internal advocacy. Specifically, how do you capture your wins, manage up effectively, and document your impact without coming across like you're bragging or self-promoting? Because here's the thing. If you're doing great work, but nobody knows about it, you're hurting yourself. You're limiting your career growth. You're making it harder for leadership to advocate for you when promotion conversations happen. And you're missing opportunities to shape how customer success is valued inside your organization. But there's a line, right? Nobody wants to be that person who constantly talks about themselves or takes credit for team wins or shows up to every meeting with a highlight reel. So how do you walk that line? How do you make your impact visible without being insufferable about it? That's what we're covering today. Let me start with a story from my time at Palo Alto Networks. I was managing a portfolio that included Lowe's, which was one of our largest and most strategic accounts. We just completed a major expansion that took months of relationship building, technical alignment, executive engagement. The deal closed at $385,000 in ARR growth. And it was one of the biggest wins that my team had that quarter. The expansion was announced in an internal all-hands call. Sales got the spotlight. The account executive did a great job explaining how they navigated procurement and closed the deal. Absolutely deserved the recognition. But here's what I realized afterward. Leadership didn't have the full picture of how the deal came together. They didn't know about the 6 months that I'd spent building executive alignment with Lowe's CISO. They didn't know about the 3 strategic business reviews that positioned that expansion. They didn't know about the coordination with product to prioritize features before the customer would even consider expanding. And it wasn't their fault. It was mine. I'd been so focused on executing the work that I never took the time to communicate what I was doing and why it mattered. I assumed that results would tell the story. But results without context are just numbers. So I learned something important that quarter. Proactive communication isn't about taking credit. It's about giving leadership the context they need to understand how customer success contributes to business outcomes. And if you're not providing that context, you're making it harder for them to support you and your team. So let's talk about how you do this right. Internal advocacy isn't about taking credit. It's about creating a record of your contributions so that when decisions get made about your career, leadership has the data that they need to advocate for you. And let me be clear about what this isn't. This isn't about walking into your manager's office every week with a list of everything that you've done. It's not about name-dropping customers in meetings to sound important. It's not about undermining your teammates to make yourself look better. Internal advocacy is strategic. It's systematic. And when done well, it's almost invisible. Here's how I think about it. Internal advocacy has 3 core components. First, documentation. You need a system for capturing your wins in real time. Second, communication. You need to know how and when to share your impact with the people who matter. And third, positioning. You need to frame your contributions in a way that demonstrates strategic thinking, not just task completion. Let's start with documentation. Most CSMs don't document their wins because they're too busy moving from one fire onto the next. You close a renewal, you move on to the next account. You run a successful EBR, you start prepping for the next one. You resolve an escalation, you take a breath, and then the next escalation lands in your inbox. But here's the problem. If you're not capturing those wins in real time, you're going to forget them. And when your annual review rolls around, or when your manager asks for examples of your impact, you're going to sit there trying to remember what happened 6 months ago. So here's what I do. I keep a running document that I call my impact log. It's just a simple Google Doc. Every week I add a few lines about the most important things that I accomplished. And I structure it like this. Just date, customer name, action taken, and the business impact. For example, March 15th, 2024, Lowe's. Brand executive business review with the CISO and VP of IT. Secured commitment to expand deployment to additional business units. 385,000 ARR expansion confirmed. That's it. Just 4 pieces of information. It takes 2 minutes to log it. But over the course of a year, that log becomes a gold mine, because when you're putting together your self-review or prepping for a promotion conversation or updating your resume, you've got a complete record of your contributions with dates, customers, and measurable outcomes. And here's the key. Don't just log the big wins. Log the invisible work too. The customer you pulled back from churn, the internal alignment you built between sales and product, the escalation you resolved before it became a crisis. Because that invisible work is what makes you valuable. And if you don't capture it, it disappears. Now, some of you might be thinking, Mark, I don't have time to update a document every week. And that's fair. But here's my counter argument. You don't have time not to. Because if you're working hard and leadership doesn't see it, you're invisible. And invisible people don't get promoted. So make the time. Block 15 minutes on a Friday afternoon. Call it your weekly reflection and log your wins. Now let's talk about communication. Because having an impact log is great, but if it just sits in your Google Drive, it doesn't do anything for you. You need to share your impact in a way that feels natural and adds value to the conversation. Here's how I approach it. First, I share updates proactively with my manager. Not every week, but at least once a month. I'll send a quick email with 3 to 5 bullet points summarizing what I've been working on. And I structure it around outcomes, not activities. So instead of saying, I had 12 customer calls this week, I say, closed a $47,000 expansion with Ernst & Young after 3 months of executive engagement. Instead of saying, I've been working on the renewal forecast, I say, updated renewal forecast to reflect 95% confidence on Q3 pipeline based on recent customer health checks. Do you see the difference? One is a list of tasks. The other is a demonstration of impact. And here's the thing. When you do this consistently, your manager starts to see you differently. You're not just a CSM who's busy. You're a CSM who delivers measurable results. And that changes the conversation when they're thinking about promotions, raises, or who they want to put on high visibility projects. Now, some managers are going to ask you for this. They're going to say, send me a weekly summary. And if your manager does that, great. You're lucky. Do it. But most managers won't ask because they're busy too. So you have to take the initiative. And that's what separates the CSMs who get noticed from the CSMs who get overlooked. Now, there's a second communication channel that matters, and that's cross-functional visibility. Because the truth is, your manager isn't the only person who influences your career. Sales leadership, product leadership, the VP of customer success, even finance, they all have input into how customer success is perceived and how individual CSMs are valued. So you need to make sure those stakeholders see your impact too. But here's the trick. You can't just walk into a sales QBR and start listing your accomplishments. That's annoying. Instead, you share your impact in the context of the work. Let me give you an example. At Swim Lane, I was working on a complex account with a large retail customer. The account had been red for months. Multiple escalations, stakeholder turnover. We're at risk of losing the renewal. I spent the next 90 days executing a full path to green recovery plan. I rebuilt the relationship with our new IT director. I resolved the outstanding escalations. I ran an executive business review that reestablished executive alignment. And we closed the renewal at 100%. Now, when I shared that outcome in our internal customer success team meeting, I didn't say, look what I did. I said, here's what worked on the XYZ account. Thought it might be useful for others dealing with similar situations. And then I walked through the process, the stakeholder mapping, the escalation resolution, the EBR structure, renewal positioning. And do you know what happened? Leadership took note because I wasn't just reporting a win. I was demonstrating strategic thinking. I was showing that I had a repeatable process and I was offering value to the rest of the team. That's how you build internal credibility without coming across as self-promotional. You share your wins in a way that helps others learn from them. Now let's talk about positioning, because this is where most CSMs just miss the opportunity. When you talk about your work, you need to frame it in terms that matter to leadership. And what matters to leadership is business impact. So instead of saying, I ran 12 customer calls this month, you say, completed quarterly check-ins with all tier 1 accounts, identified 3 expansion opportunities totaling $120K in pipeline. Instead of saying, I resolved an escalation, you say, prevented churn on a $200,000 account by coordinating with engineering to resolve a critical bug and rebuilding stakeholder trust through weekly status updates. Do you see the difference there? One describes what you did, and the other explains why it mattered. And here's the other thing. When you're positioning your work, don't just talk about what you accomplished. Talk about how you accomplished it. Because leadership isn't just looking for results. They're looking for people who can think strategically, influence cross-functionally, and execute consistently. So if you've rescued a red account, don't just say you saved it. Talk about how you built the recovery plan, how you aligned sales, product, and support behind your strategy, how you managed executive stakeholder relationships, how you measured progress and adjusted as you went along. That's what demonstrates leadership potential. That's what shows you're ready for the next level. Let me give you one more example from swim lane that shows how individual advocacy can scale to functional advocacy. I was working on a complex account with a large retail customer. The account had been red, again, for months, multiple escalations, also stakeholder turnover, and also at risk of losing the renewal. Spent the next 90 days executing my Path to Green recovery plan, rebuilt the relationship. I ran an executive business review. We reestablished executive alignment and closed the renewal. Now, when I shared that outcome in our internal customer success team meeting, I didn't say, look what I did. I said, here's what worked on this account, and here's why I think we should document this as a standard recovery playbook for the entire customer success team. And then I walked through the process, the stakeholder mapping, the escalation resolution framework, the EBR structure, the renewal positioning strategy. 2 weeks later, I turned that into a written runbook that any CSM could use. And I shared it in our team Slack channel with a note, documented the approach that worked on the retail account. Feel free to adapt it for your own red accounts. 3 months later, 2 other CSMs used that same framework to rescue their own at-risk accounts. And when our VP of Customer Success presented quarterly results to the executive team, they called out our customer success's improved recovery rate and referenced the playbook as an example of how we were building repeatable processes. That's functional advocacy. You take your individual wins and turn them into resources that make the entire team better. And when you do that consistently, leadership starts to see customer success differently. Not as a cost center that handles customer issues, but as a strategic function that drives retention and builds scalable processes. Here's one more example that ties this together. At Deepwatch, I was managing a high visibility account that had gone quiet. We hadn't had an executive conversation in over a year. Sentiment was neutral, but trending down, and the renewal was about 6 months out. I mapped the stakeholders, identified decision makers, coordinated with sales to re-engage at the executive level, and prepared a strategic business review that was focused on their security roadmap, not our product features. We closed the renewal early and expanded by $24,000 in ARR. But I didn't just report the win. I documented the re-engagement process as a standard approach for dormant accounts. I created a stakeholder mapping template that other CSMs could use. And when I shared the results with leadership, I positioned it as both an individual success and a repeatable framework. That's what separates strategic advocacy from just reporting results. You show that your wins aren't one-offs. They're approaches that can be scaled across the team. Now, let's talk about what not to do, because there are ways to advocate for yourself that backfire. First, don't take credit for team wins. If a renewal happened because 3 people worked on it, say that. Give credit where credit's due. Leadership sees through the person who tries to claim solo credit for collaborative work, and it damages your reputation. Second, don't badmouth your colleagues to make yourself look better. This should be obvious, but I've seen it happen. Someone will say, well, I had to fix what the previous CSM messed up, or sales didn't do their job, so I had to step in. That might be true, but it makes you look petty, and it doesn't build trust with leadership. Instead, frame it as problem solving. I inherited a challenging situation, and here's how I stabilized it. That shows accountability without pointing fingers. Third, don't overshare. If you're sending your manager a weekly email with 20 bullet points about everything you did, you're overwhelming them. Keep it focused. 3 to 5 wins per update. It's plenty. And finally, don't wait until your annual review to start documenting your impact. By then, it's too late. You need to be building your track record all year long so that when the review conversation happens, you're prepared. Now, I want to address something that comes up a lot. Some people feel uncomfortable advocating for themselves. They feel like it's self-serving, or they worry they'll come across as arrogant. And I get that. But here's what I'd say. Internal advocacy isn't about ego. It's about making sure that the people who influence your career have the information that they need to support you. Your manager can't advocate for you in a promotion conversation if they don't know what you've accomplished. Leadership can't put you on strategic projects if they don't know you're capable of handling them. And the organization can't recognize your contributions if they're not visible. So advocating for yourself isn't selfish. It's professional. It's responsible. And it's necessary if you want to grow your career. Let me give you a framework for how to think about this. Every quarter, I do 3 things. First, I review my impact log and I pull out the 5 to 7 most significant wins for the past 3 months. Second, I write a 1-page summary that connects those wins to business outcomes. Renewals closed, expansions driven, escalations prevented, executive relationships built. And third, I share that summary with my manager in a one-on-one conversation. Not in an email, but in person. Because I want to have a dialogue about my performance, not just send a report. And in that conversation, I don't just talk about what I've done. I ask for feedback. I ask what I should be focusing on next quarter. I ask what skills I need to develop if I want to move into a senior role or a leadership position. That's how you turn internal advocacy into career development. Now, let's talk about one more thing, and that's how to handle situations where your work isn't being recognized. Because sometimes, despite your best efforts, leadership doesn't see your contributions. Maybe your manager's distracted. Maybe they're new and they don't understand what you do. Maybe the organization just doesn't value customer success the way it should. When that happens, you have a choice. You can keep your head down and hope that things change. Or you can be proactive. And here's what I recommend. If you feel like your work isn't being recognized, have a direct conversation with your manager. Say something like, I want to make sure I'm aligned with your expectations and that you're aware of the impact that I'm having on the business. Can we set up a regular cadence to review my progress and discuss my career development? That puts the issue on the table without making it confrontational. And it shows that you're thinking about your growth, not just complaining about recognition. If your manager's receptive, great. You just created a structure for better communication. If they're not, that's useful information too, because it tells you that you might need to look elsewhere for career growth. Now, I know this episode has been focused on individual advocacy, but I want to close with this thought. The best CSMs don't just advocate for themselves. They advocate for their team. They advocate for their customers, and they advocate for the profession. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like. At Palo Alto Networks, I was mentoring 7 CSMs while our manager was on an extended leave. One of those CSMs, let's just call her Sarah, had just closed a difficult renewal with a retail customer that had been escalated for months. She had done excellent work. Complete turnaround, but she wasn't comfortable talking about it in team meetings. So here's what I did. In our weekly customer success leadership sync, I made sure to highlight what Sarah had accomplished. I didn't just say, Sarah saved the account. I walked through her approach, how she rebuilt the stakeholder relationships, how she'd coordinated with support to clear the backlog, how she'd repositioned the EBR to focus on business outcomes instead of product features. And I made sure to frame it as something the rest of the team could learn from. Two things happened. First, leadership took notice of Sarah's work and started putting her on more strategic accounts. And second, other CSMs started asking Sarah for advice on their own Red accounts. That's what advocacy looks like when it's done right. You're not just promoting yourself, you're elevating the people around you and demonstrating the strategic value of customer success as a function. Because customer success is still relatively new in a lot of organizations, and the way we talk about our work shapes how others perceive it. So when you're sharing your impact, don't just talk about yourself. Talk about the value that customer success brings to the business. Talk about how CSMs prevent churn, drive expansion, and build long-term customer relationships. Talk about how the work you do contributes to revenue retention and customer lifetime value. Because when you elevate the function, you elevate everyone in it. And that makes it easier for all of us to grow our careers. So here's my challenge to you. This week, start your impact log. Set up a Google Doc. Title it 2026 Impact Log or whatever works for you. And commit to spending 15 minutes every Friday capturing your wins. And next month, send your manager a summary of your top 3 accomplishments from the past 30 days. Frame them around business outcomes. Keep it concise. And ask for feedback. That's it. That's how you start building a practice of internal advocacy that will serve you for the rest of your career. Now, if you want a template for this, I've got one. It's part of the career development toolkit that's available at ClearPathCX.com. It's called the CSM Impact Tracker, and it includes a structured format for logging your wins, a monthly summary template, and a guidance on how to frame your contributions for maximum impact. So check that out if you want a head start. In our next episode, we're going to be talking about something that doesn't get discussed enough in customer success, and that's burnout. The hidden toll of emotional labor, the weight of managing customer relationships while navigating internal politics, and what you can do when you feel like you're running on empty. Because this work is hard. And if we don't talk about the reality of it, we're doing each other a disservice. So until then, here's what I'd love you to do. Pick up your calendar right now and block 15 minutes this Friday for your weekly reflection. Label it Impact Log Update. Make it recurring and protect that time like you would any customer meeting. Because your career deserves the same attention that you give to your accounts. So follow the show on your favorite platform. Visit ClearPathCX.com to grab the CSM Impact Tracker and other resources. And connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Mark Bernardin. If this episode gave you a new perspective on how to advocate for yourself without feeling uncomfortable about it, drop me a message. I read every one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. And thank you for showing up and delivering every single day. I'll talk to you soon.